Hey, listeners. Welcome to Idio Talk, an Apple podcast, or when the pod hits the pod app, it plays like a king what it says every ep when it goes on the cloud, and you'll hear the whole thing before you let your phone ring. There's no podcast that's better when you're tuned in tonight, so when you have headphones, you choose your own cast. And remember that Glens are the greatest of hosts, and if you listen too fast, then you'll miss all the jokes. But if you wait, it won't matter, because it's in your downloads. I am Walker Glenn.
And I'm Zach Glenn.
And Zach, this is a doozy of a recording session that we're having here. I'll get to that in just a minute, but we should just say what the podcast is. Idio Talk is a podcast where my brother and I talk about our shared musical obsessions. Our first season was about Radiohead. Our new season, or our current season rather, is about the music of Fiona Apple. And if you're just joining us because of Extraordinary Machine being your favorite album, welcome. Strongly encourage you to listen to our other Fiona Apple episodes. Would encourage you to go back and listen to the Radiohead episodes. But we're happy to have everyone jump on board at any time. This is a lot of people's favorite Fiona Apple record. And we have had an Extraordinary Machine-like arc in trying to record our episode about it. Zach, can you tell them what the hell is going on here today?
Yeah, I think this is our third attempt. We just had a few false starts, including a somewhat lengthy one. A few days ago, we had to we started and we just had to stop after we were only like 20 to 30 minutes in, had some technical issues, and then just now. We started again. I don't know how far we got in, but and I don't know what the issue was, but all of a sudden the visual just stopped. So mirroring the arc of the artist that we're covering, we're having a few false starts on this extraordinary machine of an album. But I do believe I have good vibe and feeling on this attempt. So
the good thing about this third attempt is we've brought in Michael Elizondo to come in and record it for us. Now, listeners, some of you may not know what the heck that joke means, but I assure you will by the time you have finished listening to this. But Zach, you said it yourself, mirroring the arc of the artist. That's been a big thing for us. We declared at a certain point in our Radiohead season that the arc of Idio Talk was mirroring the arc of Radiohead's career. Now, this was never more apparent than when famously we declared our Kid A episode to be our Kid A. And I don't think up to, which is not a pretentious and bold claim to make at all. Because I do think that talking about music is as hard as making groundbreaking music that is timeless and people are still talking about 30 years later with the same breathlessness that they did at the time of its release.
Well, Kid A about to have its 23rd anniversary on October 7th.
Want to feel old?
That was almost 23 years ago.
And so we talked about that a lot in the Radiohead season. I don't think we've talked this season about if we are mirroring the arc of Fiona.
No, because it came up, I think, after we recorded our Kid A episode, which is Radiohead's fourth studio album. So after we had completed that episode on Kid A is kind of when we started to incorporate it into the show. And so Fiona Apple famously has a little bit slimmer of a catalog, only 5 albums. So I think that we're kind of in lockstep. Like, we wouldn't want to come out the gates with that joke or with that observation.
Yeah, joke. What are you talking about?
Sorry, that observation.
But I do think I agree with you. And listeners, we are not kidding about the fact that so the attempt at recording this episode, the first time we sat down to do it, we didn't at all talk about mirroring the arc of Fiona. Then we just sat down to do it a few minutes ago, and we realized, oh my God, we're re-recording our episode about Extraordinary Machine. We'll get into this in a more detailed level, but this album was basically done at a certain point, and then many songs remixed, a lot of them re-recorded. It was completely reworked by the time it was put out. And a new producer was brought in, et cetera, all things that we will get into on a much more minute level. But we realized how fitting that the first time we are doing a take 2 on a new episode all together is for Extraordinary Machine. We just talked about that for like 15 minutes, and now we are here a third time talking about how we just talked about how this episode is mirroring the arc of Extraordinary Machine.
Yes.
And I don't know if now that means we are beyond the arc of Fiona. No. You don't think so?
No, because like you said, we'll get into it in greater detail. But I mean, this album took the better part of 3 years in terms of recording. And yeah, I mean, I can't.
But in podcast time, 3 days, each day is like a year.
Yes. Yeah. So
just in terms of how it feels to do a podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I do think, Zach, before we get into the album itself, I do think that since we are, I would say, undeniably mirroring the arc of Fiona Apple on this episode, right? Like, it's not even a matter of opinion. It's just like Fiona Apple had to re-record or chose to re-record Extraordinary Machine from scratch. On a great deal of the album. Walker and Zach have had to re-record this episode about Extraordinary Machine 3 times now.
She was in her mid to late 20s when she was recording it. We're both in our mid to late 20s.
Yes, I once was in my mid to late 20s like Fiona Apple.
She was great friends with John Bryan. We're aspiring to be great friends with John Bryan.
Yes, she was classically trained on the piano. We are classically trained on podcasts. By that, I mean I've listened to a lot of them. Right? It's a 1 to damn 1 at this point. Yeah, exactly. But I think this is a good opportunity since we are broaching for the first time. Are we achieving with our Fiona season what we achieved with our Radiohead season, i.e., matching the trajectory, mirroring the arc, as we like to say, emming TA of the band, mirroring the arc, emming TA.
Oh, okay.
Are we doing that with Fiona? Yes, undoubtedly on Extraordinary Machine, but why don't we look back at what we've done so far?
Sure.
And figure out if we have mirrored the arc. So our first episode of this season was an introduction to Fiona Apple. Now, do you think that mirrors the arc of Fiona Apple's introduction to the public?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. No question.
I agree. I didn't want to be the first one to say it, so I'm glad you put your neck out there like that. When Fiona Apple came out, people were like, who is this very young, right? Famously very, very young, but singularly talented, extremely full-formed voice debuting right now. And I do think based on the feedback we've gotten, the Apple podcast reviews, the upvotes on our various Reddit posts, community which we maintain celebrity status in, some of the comments on our Instagram, I feel like we have enough data to confirm that people reacted the same to our intro to Fiona Apple episode. People were like, sure, they don't always say the right thing that you want to hear.
You just did air quotes.
I just did big air quotes, listeners. People are like, yeah, they haven't necessarily learned the quote unquote do's and don'ts of this industry.
Nice. There you go.
Yeah. They're maybe navigating their new fame with a little bit more candor that we're used to. But those of us who take a more forward-thinking view have a sense that history is going to be very kind to Walker and Zach.
Yeah, people are thinking this.
People are thinking it. People are saying it. Many people are saying. Okay, so that's the world.
That's our first episode.
That's our first episode. So then we came out. We did a 2-part episode about Tidal. So I guess what were the single probably Sleep to Dream was probably released as a single before Tidal came out. So an intro to Fiona Apple was our Sleep to Dream.
Sure.
Then our 2-part Tidal episode, obviously, was our VMA's acceptance speech?
Well, I think our 2-part title is like, hey, the singles, like if you just want to watch like all the music videos and listen to the singles from that album, casual listener, go ahead. If you want, but then if you want to listen to it start to finish, tracks 1 through 10, listen to the full episode.
So part 1 is the singles.
Yes.
And part 2 is the full album. Like you listen to the singles and you were like, I'm going to do my ass a favor and get down to my local Tower Records and buy myself the damn compact disc of Walker and Zach Glenn spitting their fiery hot takes about Fiona Apple to me. Their main take consistently being, she's great, this is great.
Exactly.
Okay. And then what did we do after that? No, then we did an episode that was not about Fiona Apple. It was about a movie. It was about the King of Comedy. That is our VMA's acceptance speech. People were puzzled, but those who understood help me out.
It's done really well in the room, like the VMA speech.
Thank you.
I think that has been our most successful side quest episode yet. If you use like download numbers and so forth as a metric, people have, I'm being serious and being using a comedic vibe, but no, that episode, people really seem to want to hear us talk about the King of Comedy, which is
for
really
3 hours.
Because for 3 hours, because those are really fun side quests, and if people come to a season because they love the musical artists, I'm not mad at the fact that they don't get as excited about a side quest that has seemingly nothing to do with the artist. I get it, but it has been really exciting to see folks kind of engage with us and talk about, that they enjoyed that episode at least. So thank you, listeners.
Totally. So that was our VMA speech, where it did really well in the room. The people who understood that it was cool are, a little bit
Chris
ahead. Chris Rock, exactly. But obviously some head scratching, some puzzlement, and even some condescending criticism out there in the world. But we stand tall and stand behind it and are not going to let it bring us down. And we then silenced our haters and our critics by doing our Win the Pawn episode.
Exactly. Yeah.
Win the Pawn just completely built off the foundation we had made with our title episode. Critically lauded, adored. All the videos, I think, to that episode we did were directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. And then, like Fiona Apple mirroring the arc of the artist, we did an episode about the hiatus. We did not take a hiatus. That was a really fun episode. I loved that one. And now, finally, getting us to the present day, as covered, we are mirroring the arc of Fiona Apple by being plagued by endless difficulties, stops and starts. Zach, I think that's as good of an intro as any to like get into some of the background of this album. And I want to let you kind of take over there. I'll interject if I have anything constructive to add, but there's a lot to go over about this album. Should I maybe let the listeners know right away, for those who, because some people listening are Fiona Apple experts like ourselves, should I address the elephant in the room?
Yeah, please.
So there is a bootleg, unreleased, but available online version of this album of its original arrangements as produced by John Bryan. And Zach will get into this in more detail, but we are covering the studio released version of 2005's Extraordinary Machine. We are going to be doing an episode where we listen to and discuss the tracks from the John Bryan version. And it's certainly going to come up a lot in terms of talking about the background of this album. But when we're listening to the songs, we're going to address each song as its own standalone track on the studio version without comparing it to the John Bryan version. A lot of people have not heard the John Bryan version. A lot of people have. Big Fiona Apple fans have. It kind of lives in mythology for a lot of fans. But when we get to that, I would be very interested in doing a track-by-track comparison and pointing out where we have preferences for one version or another, if any. But Today, that's only ancillary. We'll talk about it when it's relevant, but we're not discussing those versions of the songs. We're just talking the studio tracks.
Exactly. Yeah. Because I think that when, if you're going to take the time to do a podcast on an artist such as this, you gotta have your fanship be at a certain level, but it's not really fair to the album to constantly be mentioning or comparing, in this episode, at least, the alternate version that, as you said, is a bootleg. So that's where we're going to be focusing our energy today, is on the album version that was released, that was produced by Mike Elizondo and Brian Cahew, right? Not John Bryan.
Well, John Bryan still has a production.
He still has a
credit
producer
on it,
credit,
but
yes,
but
and I
it's
do think
not
that there's
really
a lot of...
it's not really his project. The version that we're listening to.
But even that right there, though, where it's like, you interjected, it's like, what is really the right way to put it? Because he does still have a producer credit, but this is not the version that we're listening to, right? And I think that you will hear some distinct differences in that future episode when we go through it.
But there is at least one song on this studio version, and I want to say there's 2 songs. And maybe that's in our notes. But I know the title track is on the album exactly as John Bryan and her arranged and produced it. And I believe
a lot of the tracks,
the final track,
it is in our...
I believe Waltz, actually, Better Than Fine, the closing track, is also the John Bryan version, and the studio album version are the same.
Yeah, well, we'll get into that as we go through in more detail. So I'm just going to go big bullet points here on release date, recorded dates, etc. And then within that, then we'll go into greater detail on the background and production and recording and all of that. So just to get the most basic information out of the way, pertaining to Extraordinary Machine, Fiona Apple's 3rd studio album.
Can you believe it's only the 3rd? Like, I mean, sorry to, but it just...
No, that's all right.
Honestly, just to me, like, with the density of material that Fiona Apple has given us up to this point in her career and that we've covered, it feels like we are so much farther into a career than a 3rd album.
Well, she just starts at such a high bar. So I think the thing that was interesting, I'm glad you interjected that. The thing that's interesting in comparing Fiona Apple to, say, a band like Radiohead that we covered in our first season, and I would say is our favorite band, shared, not far surpassing Fiona Apple, but it's, there could only be one favorite. Radiohead, I think, are so fun to study and examine their catalog. Whether you share this opinion or not, they did not start at as high of a level as Fiona Apple did. You can really hear the youth. You can really hear them still trying to find their sound. I don't think that you hear that with Fiona Apple. I mean, you definitely hear youth in her voice and like a prodigy level talent, but I don't hear, oh, that sounds like a young teenager. Her songwriting chops are just unbelievable. I wouldn't say the same is true for Radiohead. So I think that when you start at such a high level within the person's catalog, it is sort of jarring to realize that this is only her 3rd studio album.
I think that's such a good contrast to make, because when I think about Radiohead's 3rd album, to me, it's the first Radiohead album. Totally. And I mean this very broadly, because Radiohead, there's a lot of things that are very distinct about them from even Pablo Honey. But OK Computer...
Yes,
is the first album to me that sounds like Radiohead as we know them. If you were to go see them live at any point in, say, the last decade, it is very likely the oldest album you are going to hear any material of.
Yes, Walker, except there is a video from 2017 of them playing the title track from The Bends.
Oh, that's awesome. And they played Creep live in 2017 as well.
But it's so cool. The reason it's a video with like a bajillion views is, well, not the reason, but one of the reasons is because Johnny breaks his G string and flawlessly pulls it off his guitar and restrings it in a manner of like 7 seconds.
Anyways, that has nothing to do with anything. There's a few groupies out there who I've heard say Johnny's broken a few of their G strings in his day as well.
Oh no! Anyways,
Johnny can break my G string any day, if you know what I'm saying.
Well, you let me know how that goes. So, as I was saying, though, so this is her 3rd studio album, which is pretty extraordinary. And its release date, and I'm talking final release date of the commercial release, was October 4th, 2005. the producer of this. What can I put in front of it when I'm talking about the definitive version that was commercially available, not the.
I think I think that that's just understood from here on out.
Yeah. Okay,
and the process of recording this album involves talking about the unreleased version, but when Zach is reading off these stats, he's talking about what is on the, in the liner notes of the album that was released in 2005.
Thank you.
Get it, so listeners? Jesus.
The producers of this album are Mike Elizondo, Brian Cahew, and John Bryan. The recorded dates. Now, I am going to read for both versions at this on this one. The recorded dates for the I'm going to go chronologically. For the John Bryan version is June 2002 to August 2005. That's for final mix and edit because John Bryan claimed that the album was done in both 2003 and 2004 in multiple interviews that I found. So that is to say the June 2002 to August 2005. I don't know that that's necessarily correct. And we'll come into where that's contradicted via a couple interviews in a minute here. But for the Mike Elizondo and Brian Cahew version, the recorded dates are listed as April 2004 to August 2005. The label that it was released through was Epic Records and Clean Slate Records. The length of this album is 50 minutes and 34 seconds. And, Extraordinary Machine produced 4 different singles. Produced and this is in kind of chronological order how they were released. Oh Sailor was the first single. Parting Gift was the second. Not About Love was the third. And Get Him Back was the fourth. And then I have just really, really condensed some facts and commercial performance and critical reception. But again, we're going to get into all this in a lot greater detail in a second here. So initially, the album was deemed a commercial mediocrity by the label. And in comparison to Fiona Apple's 2 albums, in terms of sales volume, a lot of this had to do with the immense amount of shift occurring in the music industry at the time of this album's release. And what I mean by that is in regards to how music was delivered to consumers. This is still in the CD compact disc era, but it is definitely right at the moment that this is shifting, I would say, for the majority of consumers.
I mean, anecdotally, this is, I was thinking about this before our first re-record attempt, is I was realizing, I can't say with absolute certainty, but this is one of, if not the last CDs I ever remember buying.
Yeah.
And this was a co-owned CD of myself and my girlfriend at the time. I don't know who put the money down on that one, but off the top of my head, the last CDs I ever remember buying are not in a particular order, except I know American Idiot was in 2004. And I remember buying that at Hot Topic. And I remember buying Get Behind Me, Satan by the White Stripes.
Sure.
I don't know if that came
2005.
Okay. And I don't know if that came before or after Extraordinary Machine.
Before. It came out in the summer, in May, I think.
Okay. And I remember Extraordinary Machine. And at this point, CDs were kind of they always were a luxury, but at this point, it was also a luxury of weighing it against, am I able to find some sort of reasonable download of this online that has all the tracks? We've talked before about how like the Napster and then LimeWire era, you could get a lot of stuff, but you would often get stuff that was mislabeled or the sound quality wasn't great. And it's like, even if I can get all the songs, is this an artist that I love so much that I want to hold the product and see what's in the liner notes and the lyrics and everything? So Zach, this is, as far as I know, possibly the last CD I ever bought.
That's so interesting too, because I was thinking about 2005. This is the summer I turned 16. My parents bought me an iPod for the first.
Wow.
Definitely my first. Yeah. So just to get that, I think is just, and we were raised in a smaller town, and that has nothing to do with anything except for that, like DSL and like, faster types of internet that would maybe be like available in mass in bigger cities like San Francisco or New York or Chicago or whatever, may have been slightly slower to get us, but we weren't living in the Stone Age or anything like that, so it really maybe like 1 year less in terms of like MP3s becoming a regular part of the way I consume music or something like that, but not much. And so I think that's really interesting that whether it actually was or, was just close to the last CD you may have bought, anecdotally, that kind of matches my experience too. So according to this, I only have one more small paragraph here. According to Nielsen SoundScan in the United States. As of 2023, Extraordinary Machine ranks third overall in Fiona Apple's catalog in terms of sales volume, with over 1 million copies sold. I think you'd mentioned either on mic or off mic that this album is out of print in its vinyl issue or reissue. And the album was nominated for the Grammy Award for Best Pop Vocal Album in 2006. In 2009, Extraordinary Machine was named the 49th Best Album of the 2000s by Rolling Stone. And in 2020, it was ranked at number 444 on the magazine's list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. So obviously, it's gained a lot of momentum in terms of its notoriety and respect kind of post-release. I'm not saying it was quite well received, and we'll get into that in a minute, upon its initial release. But those were just the quick bulleted points I wanted to highlight before we jump into a little deeper on background and production and recording and all that.
Did I tell you the story of how I almost obtained a copy of this on vinyl, but ultimately did not?
No.
This is a little sad. Sometimes I talk about doing stand-up comedy on here, and I know, listeners, to you, it seems incredibly glamorous, and you wonder just what sort of a lifestyle of glitz and opulence is Walker living. Well, not too long ago, in the year of 2021, I was booked to headline at a local club, and I don't want to say exactly where because the person that runs this club is actually a very sweet guy who has given me a lot of shows over the years and is running a small business. So in this, where I'm about to dump on this one show that he booked me on, I don't want to say where it was, but I was doing a show booked to headline a small club in a small town. And headlining is something that I'm really excited when I get the opportunity to do. And it was like, great, I'm going to get to do 35, 40 minutes in this town that I've done a lot of fun shows in. The drive is about a 6-hour drive. And when I got to the club, the guy told me hey, we didn't sell any tickets, so we're going to try to bark a few people in. Now, I am not under any sort of delusion that I am a draw. What I was laboring under was an assumption that, if you did not have tickets sold to the show that I am driving 6 hours to do, that you would maybe let me know so I could then make a decision about, do I want to drive 6 hours to do a show for possibly people that you shuffle in from the street that I am not going to get paid for because no tickets have been sold. Right. And that option was not given to me. And that is
how the hell this is going to tie into you possibly getting a free copy. I'm dying.
Well, the story is just tragedy after tragedy because I have already revealed it does not end with me getting a free copy of Extraordinary Machine. It does end with me trying to get a free copy of Extraordinary Machine. What ended up happening is by the time I was actually on stage, there were about 10 people in the room. I have performed for 10 people many, many, many times and would not walk out of a show that only had 10 people. But I would not voluntarily and knowingly drive 6 hours and book a crappy hotel room to perform for 10 people. So because he was not able to pay me afterwards, I went into the back room of this club and there was a giant, huge, really cool record collection. Nice. And I started stacking up a bunch of records. And then when he came and sheepishly was telling me how there was no money because of no ticket sales, I said, hey, that's okay. I know. I would like to be paid in these records because I drove 6 hours to be here. And I really wish you'd told me that no tickets had been sold. And he was like, okay, I guess we can do that. And then he said, can we go through them? Because I don't want to give away any of my wife's. And one of them was Extraordinary Machine. And that was his wife's album. And even though I was very annoyed, I was not pissed enough or assertive enough it was embarrassing enough to be asking to get paid out of this man's personal record collection that I mean, I'm glad I did it.
Yeah.
And it turned out a couple of the records that I took were worth quite a bit of money. One was a first pressing of the Boots Riley group, The Coup, which is an Oakland-based rap group.
Is he the director?
Yeah, he directed Sorry to Bother You. But
I didn't know he was in a rap group.
Yeah, that was like his main career. And
okay, that makes sense.
Still in Oakland. I have seen him about a dozen times around Oakland, most recently like a week ago at a show
just like casually?
Yeah, he's just around. He's just like he's a local,
Yeah, he's a cool
notable local resident. And that pressing turned out to be out of print and
hell yeah,
worth like $100, but not worth the dignity that I sacrificed to do this show. So would it have been worth it if I had finally ended up with a out of print copy of Extraordinary Machine? Maybe so, but that's not what happened, and that's not what we're here to discuss today.
Well, let me ask you this though: does the album cover? Because I do want to talk about the album cover, and I do not have this in my notes, so it might be something to talk about as we're going through the tracks or whatever. But does the album cover look the same on the vinyl pressing as it does on the CD?
It did.
Okay, because on Win the Pawn, that's not the case.
That's not the case, but I imagine there's original vinyl pressings of although
Probably.
Win the Pawn came out albums that came out in the 90s, there wasn't like the vinyl renaissance that's happening now. Now the vinyl release is a big part of an album. So that might also be why Extraordinary Machine, is out of print, is because in 2005, people were not. It was only vinyl collectors who were buying vinyl, right? And so a lot of new albums
have been a big thing of every town. I feel like for maybe not. I don't know. It's hard to put myself back 18 years ago, but I bet part of it has to do with the fact that there are the different versions of this album. And I don't know, man. I mean, it's like I know Fiona Apple is proud of this album, but it does seem befitting to me that of all her albums, this one would be the hardest to find. I don't know. That's completely anecdotal. But do we want to dive into, because I want you to feel free to interject a lot more at a more granular level. I have a lot of notes here. We're not going to read everything word for word, but on the background and production of this album, the recording, and then some of the delays. Is it okay to jump into that?
I think we should jump into it, but I kind of want to insert a quick topic into what you just said, just because I think
please.
The fact that you said that it makes sense to you that this is the hardest one to find. I don't now remember if you said this in the version that we are recording now or before, if it was in the John Bryan version of this episode or the Mike Elizondo version of the episode that you said this, but you mentioned that, you get the impression this is out of a relatively small catalog of 5 albums. This album is very precious in particular to many Fiona Apple fans. I agree with that. I just will quickly summarize that my experience with it is this was the first Fiona Apple album I got into as an adult. It was very big with not just myself and my girlfriend at the time, but I also remember it being a real staple among my whole friend group at the time.
Yeah.
It, to me, in my little bubble, felt like Fiona Apple's comeback. So I was surprised to see that this actually sold less well than its 2 predecessors, because to me it was like Fiona Apple was back in the limelight. And I guess to some extent that's true, but now I almost feel like it's more like her fan base had gotten rid of kind of the fair weather, just popular music fans who will listen to Fiona Apple. And it was now down to like a not small, but slightly smaller core of fans who they're not just into Fiona Apple type music that's on the radio. They're into Fiona Apple and they're going to listen to whatever she puts out. All that to say, I'm curious where this album lands for you. We're going to talk about how we feel about it now, but just kind of like in the overall catalog of her work, where is this album for you? Is it one that you've listened to a lot? Is it one of your big ones? Is it one you're getting more into now? We're more into back in the day? Like what is Extraordinary Machine for you as a fan?
Oh, well, I mean, I definitely have a take on this album, which I think we'll get into after we go through like these other points pertaining to its history more, and not totally tip my hand or whatever. But I do think it's interesting to hear from the hosts kind of how they feel about it, good or bad, ahead of time before they pop on the tracks. But just in terms of answering that question, it's so funny because it's like an album I'm super familiar with and always have been since I've been a fan of hers. But I would say it's the album that I find myself going back to probably the least.
Okay.
And but so I don't know. I mean, that makes it sound like maybe, but like there are albums that I love from artists like The Wall or something like by Pink Floyd, where I'm so familiar with every single track on it, but it's not the album that I go back to the most in a group of albums or by an artist that I go back to a lot. Right. I mean, Pink Floyd has almost nothing to do with Fiona Apple, potentially. But like, so you know what I'm saying? I'm very familiar with this album, but when I pop on Fiona, you know, outside of 2020, so like sort of leading up to that, because as I've talked about in 2020, I listened to that album the most of any albums by any artist, the Fetch the Bolt Cutters. I don't know. I find myself going back to the first two and probably the Idler Wheel, the condensed title, a little bit more than I find myself going back to this one. And it is one of those albums where I'll think that there might be one or two surprises track wise, but then I know the melodies at least to every song. I don't know if you have any albums like that.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where you think you haven't. It's like when we were, I don't know, like we were at our mom and dad's house. I don't know if I was still living at home at this point or whatever, but our youngest sister, we were like teenagers or either that or we were there for like a family function in young adulthood. And our youngest sibling was a little kid at the time, and she was watching Fox and the Hound. And it was a movie that I had not seen for, you know, probably 20 years up till that point. And there's a part where an old lady is waving a shotgun around and a character says, "Watch it, that thing's loaded." And she shoots
"Watch it, that thing's loaded."
And then she shoots it into the air. And in unison with the character, I turned to Zach and said, "No, it ain't loaded."
And I died laughing.
And I did not know that I could say dialogue from Fox and the Hound with it until it happened. So is it kind of like that, Zach?
I would say I'm more familiar with it than that, but it's kind of like that, yes. I don't know. It's just like melodically, this album is really unique. And I don't know how much more I can say without tipping my hand to just some of my overall thoughts on it. So if we could kind of circle back to that, I'd appreciate it before we start the tracks.
I want to do the same thing. I don't want to say, like, my feelings about this album have evolved over the years, but I didn't really know that they had evolved until undertaking this re-listening for the last month or so, because I don't know if I would say it's the album. Well, I think I would also say that it turns out that this is the album I have gone back to the least. But
really?
I did not. Yes. But that was a surprise to me. And the reason I say that is because, you know, sometimes an album is such a important part of your musical DNA or the DNA of your fanship of a particular artist that it's like, I maybe had not listened to Extraordinary Machine in its entirety for much longer than I would have thought. But because it's the one that it's like, oh, Fiona Apple is possibly my favorite songwriter.
Right.
And I'm going to be greatly anticipating the releases that follow this as they come out. And I'm now going back and getting back into the stuff before this in a whole new way. I think it's just assumed a very high ranking spot in her catalog for me. But honestly, I gotta say, as I listened to it, not a lot, but there were 2 to 3 tracks that at first I was like, do I remember this song?
Totally.
That it took me a while to kind of refamiliarize myself with. And I think maybe just because of the literal fact that I do not own it on vinyl, I definitely would have thought that the album I have listened to the least as a Fiona Apple fan was Tidal.
Right.
But I have Tidal on vinyl, and I think that I actually play it a pretty fair amount. And I do not have Extraordinary Machine on vinyl, and it had been the longest since I had heard it. And I will just say that I feel differently about it than I thought I did. I guess I'll leave it at that.
That's really exciting trailer. Well, that is super exciting for me to hear. And I want to circle back to that, but I do want to just talk about And I'm not trying to rush through that. I mean, that makes me
no. That's all I wanted to say.
Feelings.
That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah.
So that's like the mindset that I have been in when we're listening to these tracks, is that my assumed feelings about it have not held.
Well, I would just say then actually too, before we eventually circle back to that, the album that it reminds me of the most in a one-to-one comparison, even though they have different amount of albums in their catalog, is I would say XO by Elliott Smith. In that, I've
literally compared it into an off-pod conversation with somebody talking about the album.
Oh, but not with me though.
No,
that's exciting
please continue. But I've been comparing it to XO also.
Well, I have a couple comparisons in terms of like sonically, but we'll hold on those. Just in that I am so familiar with XO, I've listened to it so many times. There are automatic skippers, which is, I would say, a unique quality in terms of Elliott Smith's catalog. And I would say that this album has fallen into that same category where there are automatic skippers, where I don't really have that with any. But even on those, though, it's like the music just comes to life in my mind so quickly. For Extraordinary Machine. And I think that I really want to speed things along, but I would also say I think that subconsciously
we're good on time.
No, I know. I want to talk about this in a minute, but like subconsciously what throws me off about it is the album cover itself, which I do think is an outlier in her catalog. So I think that stylistically and aesthetically, there's something about it that I don't necessarily assume Fiona Apple when it comes on. Not like I just sit and stare at the album cover when an album comes on, but that's all.
It's the first one that doesn't have a picture of Fiona Apple on the cover.
And the last one.
Unless I am mistaken, Zach, did Fiona Apple turn into some sort of budding pea pod? I mean, she took a long hiatus, and like, hey, if that's what she wants to do, if that's her truth, like, God love her. But as far as I'm concerned, Fiona Apple's a human lady. And this is some sort of budding plant or flower.
Right. And obviously the album after this, The Idler Wheel, it's a
self-portrait.
It's self-portrait, yeah. And it's definitely, what is the style of art? I'm trying to think of, like Picasso or...
abstract.
It's an abstraction, but it still feels very Fiona Apple, which I would say this album cover does not in an interesting way. But talking about the hiatus that we've already covered, a little bit in our hiatus episode, but not necessarily pertaining to this album specifically. After Fiona Apple had completed a concert tour in support of the previous album, Win the Pawn, in the year 2000, Fiona Apple relocated to Los Angeles area. There's a direct quote. She said, "The first couple of years after Win the Pawn, I didn't have anything left in me to write about. I just figured if the songs came to me, they came to me. And if not, oh, well, it's been fun," she said. And so that's just to say that.
And then she said, hiatus, "Oh, well, interesting.
Know, right?
Can I use that? Can that be a song?"
Well, during this hiatus, Walker touched on this just a little bit in that hiatus episode, but she contemplated retiring from her recording career. And I put in my notes here, similar to Radiohead after OK Computer, they did contemplate just not making an album. It eventually led to the masterpiece that is Kid A. And in spring of 2002, Apple and John Bryan, her longtime friend and producer on Win the Pawn, and he had also worked with her extensively on Tidal, but was not the producer. They met for their weekly lunch meeting. And John Bryan...
How cute is that?
It's very cute. Although I don't think what this leads to is super cute from John Bryan. So he had just come out of a 5-year relationship with comedian, and Walker, maybe you can help me on the pronunciation of this.
It's pronounced Rice Cub.
Rice Cub. Okay, thank you. So he had just come out of a 5-year relationship with comedian Mary Lynn Rice Cub. Their relationship had ended somewhat abruptly during the shooting of Paul Thomas Anderson's film Punch Drunk Love, which came out in 2002. She is so
funny in that.
That movie's spectacular. And he reportedly begged Fiona Apple to make another album with him. And he's quoted here as she's quoting him. But he reportedly said, "I need work that can save me." She agreed. And Bryan and Apple went to her record label at the time, Epic Records, with strict stipulations that there be no deadline to release this album. The label eventually agreed, and a tentative November 2002 release date was then set for the album. Now, obviously, that was pushed forward many times, but I do want to say right off the top that I think this is very interesting. Versions of how events actually happened change over time for people, not even with any malice or anything like that necessarily. Right. But
right?
I do think it's very interesting that the genesis of this album came from John Bryan asking Fiona Apple to make an album so that his mental health could survive, essentially.
Mhm.
And I know that's a very, very condensed version of what may have happened. I mean, they're still friends, as we'll talk about in a second, but you can't make art for other people. And now if it happens to save other people, as Fiona Apple, I mean, even on our Instagram, and jokes aside, we've gotten several comments of when posting, hey, we're going to be talking about this album. One comment in particular, somebody commented, this album got me through high school, about Win the Pawn. And that is just so beautiful. And that's very anecdotal. But what are your thoughts on that, Walker?
I think it's a really interesting question. I would say that it's really kind of in the details, and these are details that we can't know. But it's in the details how okay this is. I definitely think there's a very toxic version of what you're saying, where it's like there's like an emotional blackmail version, right? And no one's saying this is what he said, but there's like, make another record or I'll kill myself, right?
A little bit.
But there's also, I don't know. I think that sometimes really talented, extraordinary, forgive the pun, but extraordinary talents, there's sometimes a really heavy price tag for the kind of personality that can make things like Fiona Apple can make. In our last episode, I thought, or maybe not our last episode, you in our hiatus episode, I thought really beautifully kind of commended her taking the time that she needs to take. And we talked about how that's something that is still very hard to have valued in our society.
Yeah.
But there's more legitimacy and more importance being placed on taking time for your mental health, and not having to constantly produce as a measure of your worth. So I don't want to backtrack on any of that. At the same time, I also think that sometimes a push is helpful. Now, did he go about this in a helpful way? Did him saying, I really need the fucking distraction from my breakup to work on something I'm passionate about, you should make another album, did that lock her into an obligation that was not good for her or healthy for her? And and what are the results of that, not just in the work, but on the person? I think that can be problematic, but also it can just be encouragement that it's like, you're great. We make great stuff together. I need something to fucking do. Do you want to do an album? Now, I know the word begged is what she used here, and I'm certainly not saying that something happened other than what Fiona Apple said, but also this is one of those things where not just is memory subjective, but also what's her tone as she's telling this story, or how is she relating it? Is she talking about it while saying why the album is not exactly what she wants it to be? You know what I mean? Like, oh, well, he begged me to make it because he needed a distraction from his breakup. Or is she talking about it in the same sentence as saying, what finally got her to decide to go back into the studio and make something that she's really proud of, that she received encouragement from her friend and collaborator. So I think it really, really depends, but I don't think it is inherently bad for somebody to push somebody else to do something that that they are exceptional at.
No, I agree. But I mean, I do want to point out, and this could be completely anecdotal and happenstance, but what I do find to be interesting about John Bryan's contribution, et cetera, to this album is this marks a distinct point in which he is the last time he is a collaborator with the subject of this podcast. So Fiona Apple,
I think that is telling.
And also this Punch Drunk Love was the last film that he did did an original score for, or scored in P.T. Anderson. Johnny Greenwood took over for, but took the place of John Bryan. He's done every single P.T. Anderson film, of which there have been 5, I think, since Punch Drunk Love. Now, I don't.
Mhm.
This is not about, Fiona Apple has gone on the record to say that John Bryan is somebody she greatly admires and loves working with, and are still friends with to this day. I have a direct quote later on, because there's a lot of speculation about this relationship and about this period. But like you said, I think it's telling. I don't really have a ton more to say about that. But isn't it interesting, Walker, that it's not very hard to tie it into Johnny Greenwood and Radiohead and the Boys? It's not hard at all with this period.
Well, if we're playing 5 degrees of Johnny Greenwood, it's not hard with Fiona Apple was in a relationship with Paul Thomas Anderson for many years. So, there's a very short walk to these people.
I think it might just be everyone's a little too close to each other, though, is what I feel like.
I think that you're raising a really good and interesting point, and I do think it's very interesting that Fiona Apple has not worked with John Bryan since. But I also wonder, and it can be all things, it can be none of these things, or it can be many different things. But I think that the key reason for Fiona Apple not working with John Bryan is that her last 2 albums, the albums she makes after this, are much less produced overall. And the Idler Wheel does have a producer. I forget the name, and I do not remember if Fetch the Bolt Cutters has a producer, but particularly on Fetch the Bolt Cutters, it seems like the production is much more limited to mastering and mixing the album, and that these last 2 are much more primarily self-produced by Fiona Apple. And without jumping ahead too much and giving away feelings that I have about the catalog from here on out, I think that has been an I keep saying the word extraordinary way more than I normally do.
That's all right.
I think that has been a great thing for her music, as much as I love these first 3 albums. I think that Fiona Apple is the kind of artist that even when working with a musical and sonic genius like John Bryan, I just think she does her best work when she's more on her own, doing whatever the fuck she wants. I kind of think less cooks in the kitchen is better for her. And we talked all about how fruitful their collaborative relationship was on Win the Pawn, and I thought that was so beautiful, and the way they talked about
kind of lightning in a bottle a little bit, though, maybe
lightning with the bottle, and just as symbiotic as even like a Lennon McCartney like type of thing, where it sounds like these 2 people are just speaking a shared language, that the similarities and the differences of these artistic voices is making something really miraculous. But I think, and again, all just fucking speculation on my part, I think that Fiona Apple probably outgrew those collaborations, and that some of what we hear on Extraordinary Machine may be some kind of final growing pains of that person moving on from those collaborations.
Well, let's talk a little bit more,
because it seems like, especially if they're still friends, and people can have all sorts of things happen in their relationship and still be friends. Relationships change. Them still being friends might mean that they talk all the time, or it might mean that they're still friendly and don't talk very often, right? Maybe they still get lunch once a week to this day. Maybe they run into each other once a year. Who knows? None of our business. But the fact that they both still have nice things to say about each other and both still claim to be friends makes me think that whatever rift in the relationship occurred was probably rooted in artistic differences and was the end of a working relationship more than a personal one.
Yeah.
And maybe the impetus of these sessions being him saying, make an album because I'm sad about a breakup. Maybe those are early cracks in that foundation of a what was once a very good collaboration. Maybe that is where stuff starts to sour a little bit in that I think partnership.
So. Did you get a chance to read that New York Times interview with John Bryan that I sent you?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, so I mean, the main takeaway that I took from that, we'll draw upon that maybe more as we go. But one of the things that I really noticed is some of the similarities in John Bryan and Fiona Apple as we understand them as fans who do not know these people. And what I took away from that is John Bryan seems to never be able to finish a project, whether it's his own songs. There's a direct quote where he says he has an inability to say no in terms of taking on new projects of a band that might want to work with him. And I think if you look at the stories and the lore kind of behind the Idler Wheel, and obviously behind this album, but also I'm talking about non-John Bryan produced albums, she seems to struggle with finally letting a project be done. Now, in the case of the Idler Wheel, those songs and that album was ready to be released in 2011. It was actually the studio that had a year-long delay that pushed it all the way to 2012. But I think that there's a lot of similarities that they share of perfectionism. That can be really, really cool when you work with people like that, but can be maddeningly frustrating when trying to finish something, whether it's you're writing something together, film, whatever.
Well, okay, weekly mention of Kubrick on Idiot Talk.
Absolutely.
Look at how I think that there is a real similarity in how he approached his work, that the gaps between his movies get farther and farther apart. The thing of legend that he makes people do, dozens to sometimes hundreds of takes, increases and increases. And I think that there is something where and Fiona Apple has obsessive compulsive disorder.
Yeah.
Kubrick not diagnosed with that as far as I know, but I think it's, because when I'm not on a podcast, I am armchairing as a psychologist. I think it seems
moonlighting.
Thank you. I'm an amateur psychologist. I think it seems pretty clear that he was dealing with some sort of obsessive compulsive disorder. Yeah. And I think that those impulses for control because of an anxious mind, they can become more and more severe to where completing something is an impossibility, because it's the idea of what that thing is in your mind. I mean, everyone who's ever made anything, I don't care if it's a table or a song, that no matter how good you are at your craft, the final result of the thing that exists in the world is different than the thing you envisioned in your head in some way, shape, or form. And I think for some people, that is the beautiful part of making art. And for some people, it is the agonizing part of making art.
For George Lucas, that's the agonizing part. I mean, he was, after all the awards and everything that Star Wars A New Hope won, the reason why he put his own cash into making Empire Strikes Back and put it all on the line after such a huge success was because he said Star Wars A New Hope was only about 20% of what was in his head. Isn't that crazy?
I mean, it is, until you see the prequels and you're like, thank God that the other 80% was like, lightning in a bottle, because it seems like what is in his head was incredibly boring.
That's true, but I mean, with Empire though that his claim and all the people that worked at ILM, there's a really fantastic documentary on ILM on Disney Plus that I would recommend. A lot of what the people under his employment at that time talked about was just what a generous and amazing guy he was to put it all on the line again for Empire Strikes Back, and that is much more a George Lucas film, even though he didn't direct that one. So I think in the golden era of George Lucas, it's pretty cool that, he had that desire for level of control and the result was so positive. But I know what you mean, and I think your point is really well made, actually, though. So anyways, that was just an aside.
So we're still kind of early in the background of this album. We're talking about its initial conception between Bryan and Apple.
Oh yeah. So just to drill down on some of the inconsistencies and what John Bryan has to say about the recording of this album. Not to do shoddy journalism here and just pull quotes that make the kind of maybe point that we're overall driving at. I'm still not sure, but I have a lot of notes here, but I kind of underlined what I wanted to speak to directly. So by late 2000, this is pertaining to the recording. By late 2002, Apple, Bryan, and engineer Tom Biller and percussionist Matt Chamberlain were at work in a wing of the Paramore Mansion. Pretty cool. That was built in 1923 by silent film star Antonio Marino. And the four used the building as a temporary residence from early 2003, and Chamberlain said the experience of recording there was completely amazing. So really positive. With the album half complete in April 2003, Brian, Apple, and Biller had a new release date of July 22nd for that year, right? So we're still in 2003. The album was completed from John Bryan's perspective by May of 2003, at which point the release date was pushed to September 30th. But by the fall of 2003, Apple and Bryan were back in the studio, adding finishing touches to the album, which forced the release date to February of 2004. And this was later changed to early 2004 in various magazine articles. So I just think that's really interesting, that there's inconsistencies with what was released at the time in terms of, hey, here's when it's coming out. Then retrospectively, when John Bryan said it was completed. Again, I'm not trying to like stir things up here from our little show between the two of them, but a lot of inconsistencies retrospectively versus what they were saying to the press. Do you have anything you want to add on that, or can I keep going?
No, I think it's well put. It just shows, I think if it indicates one thing almost assuredly, it's that there were communication issues about not only the concrete details of like when this album is done, but what done means in relation to this album. And I think that that's where it's still kind of unclear to me with the two versions, what Fiona Apple wanted, what the label wanted, what John Bryan wanted, and where those disagreements, what lines those all fall along. But it does seem clear to me that disagreements were an issue.
And going back to an earlier point, though, where we were talking about how the technology at the time sort of influenced and is at least goes part and parcel with the release of this album. My heading right here, I put delays in leaked tracks, parentheses, similar to what Radiohead experienced with Hail to the Thief. And listeners, go back and listen to that episode, or if not, that album was leaked ahead of the release in 2003. I think it was in March of 2003, even though the album had a final release date of June 2003. So, in late 2004, in June of 2004, the song Extraordinary, which had since been retitled as the title track, was leaked onto the internet. And then to go ahead of that, shortly thereafter, Fiona Apple fans organized a week-long mail campaign to flood Sony with support for the album and the release of the album, because Fiona essentially had a quote that she basically indicated that the album might be shelved indefinitely, right? And this is very early 2000s and also very current. There's a direct quote right here, because quite a few of the songs had been released on P2P MP3 sharing sites. This is a direct quote right here. According to the file sharing tracking website Big Champagne, in March of 2004, 46,759 people were sharing the leaked tracks on major P2P networks. The RIAA later contacted webmasters of sites hosting the files and asked them to be taken down, while BitTorrent files subsequently vanished from the Torrent Box website. So this is all just to say that this album, or some iteration of the album, had been in circulation for years prior to its actual release. So what sort of response does this create? Well, I think this creates a lot of buzz among Fiona Apple fans, but it doesn't necessarily make for the freshest and the newest presentation of material, right? So people are familiar with it in some iteration. And I think that goes part and parcel with what happened with Hail to the Thief, right? There's the different version of Sit Down, Stand Up, or things like that, right? Where folks either have an original version to compare it to, right? Because we're going to do a separate episode on the John Bryan version, but it's like, at least for the people that were following it in real time, they already know the songs in some capacity, which I don't necessarily know if that's the best way for music to be consumed. And
well, I agree. Yeah. I think especially, I think it's, and I'm not saying that hurt this album necessarily, but I think it does hurt Radiohead when it happens with Hail to the Thief. And I think it would have hurt people's perception of some of their more radical reinventions like Kid A, and that, in terms of like internet literacy of the general public and fan culture, 2005 is many, many years different than 2000.
Totally.
But it's a way that Radiohead were really, really clever in what that they controlled the information about the album. They recognized that people are following the band online with a degree of closeness that was new. And so they're the ones giving you the snippets and everything like that. And man, I really understand the temptation, but I am just so much more interested in the completed artistic vision of the artist than getting all the bits and pieces and making my own guess at what this is supposed to be. And so I do wish that there was more
mystery
and just that the artists had more autonomy over people like hearing their shit. I don't think that this is helpful to not just to the artist, but to us as fans, to getting to enjoy.
Well, yeah, because I don't want to blame
–
Fiona for the fact that a lot of snippets were, she can't control all of that. So I'm not trying to sit here and say, hey, Fiona, it's great that she took notes from that. A lot of it, as we just discussed, was leaked, right? So it's not her fault. But anyways, that's all.
So after the leak, what happens with Epic finally deciding that they're going to put this out?
Yeah, so Entertainment Weekly reported in its June 24th, 2005 issue that Apple was preparing work on a third album with producer Brian Cahew of the
Mirroring
electronic
the
band.
Arc of Video Talk.
Yeah, the Moog Cookbook, further fueling speculation amongst fans that the leaked version of Extraordinary Machine tracks had been shelved indefinitely. So we just talked about that. After months of silence, Epic released a statement regarding the album's future. This is on August 15th of 2005. Extraordinary Machine was to be officially released on October 4th, 2005. That's the actual release date. Extensively reworked by co-producers Elizondo and Cahew. Now, there's more on that, but I'm going to kind of skip ahead a little bit. And this is of note to me. Of the 11 tracks previously leaked, only 2 remain unchanged. That's a really big, in their name at least, right? So a lot of them had been renamed. Some of the tracks were radically different in terms of their arrangement. And, there's a lot more on that, but I do want to just skip ahead and say here, Walker, you can interject anything backtracking on that. But despite rumors that the album had caused a rift between Brian and Apple, they performed together at Largo the Friday evening before Epic's announcement of its release date. Brian told MTV News she re-recorded a bunch of stuff, but whatever, that's her business. I remain a fan and think she's great, and she shouldn't have to meet too much resistance. So as we talked about, they still speak about each other favorably, but there's, that's as legendary as the album itself, perhaps, is the lead up and just how unconventional its presentation was. So I want to pass it over to you before anything else is said.
I mean, I think it speaks to the feeling that I already indicated that I have, that the differences are artistic. I still am really curious what of this final product is Fiona Apple sticking to her guns of what she wanted the album to sound like, is her succumbing to pressure from the label, is her not succumbing to pressure necessarily, but consciously trying to do something more commercially viable. Because that, Zach, is the real thing that I took away from this re-listening of the album, is that I think that this is a much more directly commercial release than even Tidal.
Yeah.
In terms of its production, its songs, I do not feel like it's still Fiona Apple. It's still longer songs, but I think the songs are a little truncated compared to the first 2 albums. The arrangements are big. They're a lot bigger. And the melodies are less strange. And I am really curious if that was a point of contention between her and John Bryan, and if if that has something to do with her making an album, as you kind of speculated earlier, making an album to please other people. Right. Maybe some of what we hear here that to me feels a little less distinct than the first 2 records is from the inception point of this album being, hey, I think you should make another album, and her saying, well, okay.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that might be a little less of a fertile ground for inspiration than when the Pawn, for example, when she walked in and played 10 completed songs for John Bryan. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm really, really curious where the creative process of Apple and all the other people involved in making an album and getting it out into the world, where that kind of ends and begins on this album. And I don't have clarity on that even now. And I think that because Fiona Apple and John Bryan are friends and classy individuals, we haven't heard finger pointing about that, but I just really want to know where the visions departed in order to get these two. Because I don't, like I said, we're not going to compare track to track of the John Bryan version, but it is in some places, I would say, a radically different album, and less so in other places. But I mean, it sounds like a completely different idea of what this album was going to sound like. And in some ways, it sounds more Fiona Apple to me than the final version. And I guess maybe I'm kind of going back on what I said and we're talking too much about the unreleased version. But
but I mean, I love it.
I'm really curious what happened there.
I mean, I love, though, that you're kind of gesturing to it, because I really want to tell you, this isn't my take on the album, but, you know, this is kind of the last thing I wanted to get out up front before we start it. You used the word growing pains earlier. I have in my notes here, I think that Extraordinary Machine is representative of growth, growing pains, and stylistic choices, but they're ones that I don't always love. And, you know, you were talking about types of melody or song structure and so forth. I have my notes here right here that Fiona Apple has such an amazing ear for melody, harmony, beauty, etc. And I feel that that's really present on this album, but I don't always love the type of melody that she's leaning into throughout the album, even when I love the song. And I think you'll like this. So this album to me is very much Fiona Apple's most Beatlesy album. Which is not to say that it's derivative or siloed to one group or influence at all. Obviously, there's a lot of jazz influence. There's a lot of artists that, you know, I am and am not familiar with. But I adore the Beatles more than any other group on earth. So that's a huge compliment to any musician of any era. But the type of Beatles music that it reminds me of is some of my favorite and least favorite Beatles songs. So like the comparison I wrote on a lot of the tracks that they remind me of is Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite, that really circusy kind of like cabaret. And then one of my
Is that a least favorite
songs,
Beatles song of yours?
It's not a least favorite, but it's a type of Beatles that I don't love.
It's not your favorite impulse of theirs?
Correct. Yeah. And then a lot of the songs, like sort of in the piano groove, remind me of Lady Madonna, which is one of my favorite Paul songs of all time. So Fiona Apple has a really close relationship with cabaret stylings due to her exposure to just a huge type of art in general, but also through her sister Maud. You know, we talked all about that. And I don't always feel that these influences service her style in the best way. And I think that that's sort of how I would summarize Extraordinary Machine. And then I just want to borrow from you what you said about when we were talking about Radiohead's King of Limbs. I also find this to be her most Tim Burton-y album. And that starts with the very first track and persists at various moments throughout the album. So, you know, that's a lot kind of up front to sort of preview how I feel about it. Some of it might sound a little bit more overtly negative than I mean it, but I did want to put that up front as sort of a preamble to my overall feelings on the album.
I think we're getting to a point where it just makes sense to start playing the thing, but I will say I share some of your observations. I hadn't thought of it necessarily as compared to the Beatles specifically, but I do think that this is a somewhat self-consciously pop forward album. And you said something that is a really strong feeling I've had is about when do these kind of pop impulses serve the songs? And I would say in some cases, I think they serve the songs quite well. Like we're no longer beating around the bush about some of the feelings we have about the album. I think that we will still be able to address those in more of a holistic fashion after having listened to it. But it sounds like we both have mixed feelings about this album. And I think that it contains songs where the fact that she is being a little more hooky in her melodic choices create some of the best work that she's done. And some of it feels like it would be better if she didn't have a quota of accessibility to fill. And again, I don't know if that is self-imposed or label imposed. I have to say, the research that we've done on this episode has kind of led me to believe that it is not all external pressure. I wonder if after this long of a hiatus, if Fiona Apple was like, well, I'm making a fucking album. The last one, you know, critics really liked or whatever, but it didn't get any radio play. Like you said, the music industry has really changed. I think she might have, and there's nothing wrong with this. I think part of the thinking behind these songs is like, I'm going to do my songs and I'm going to try to be very me, but I would like to sell some fucking records.
Sure.
And
that's a good point.
I just think that the work before or since that seems more free of that concern, it speaks a little more to me. And now I don't know if I've said too much about how I feel about it, but I guarantee you are about to hear me say I love this song a lot of times as we go through this record. There are just some choices to me that don't hold up as well as choices on the album before and the one that we're going to be covering after this. And,
I think
and I don't know that was entirely pressure from the label because these are her songs. And because they're her songs, there isn't a single song on this album that doesn't have that unique quality that every Fiona Apple song has. It's just some of them sound like they're playing it safe to me.
I'd agree. I also think that this album suffers from outpacing its contemporary and future influences, both good and bad. So maybe not outpacing, but I think that because it took so long to release, and I mean, it's just like I put in my notes here that like some of the artists that it reminds me of, some of whom I like and some of whom I would deem to be lesser than, like I hear a lot of Regina Spektor kind of modeling her catalog a lot after the songs on this, and then artists that were a flash in the pan. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but like Colby Calais or something like that, where I'm like, oh, this album is deeply impactful in terms of its influence, but it's sort of hard to push out what came like, you know, in like year 2006. So like directly after. But I also think it's a great example of how, as music fans, we can absorb so much about an artist consciously or subconsciously through the narrative of an album's backstory, and how that can maybe impact how we hear it. You know, not for everyone, of course. There's a lot of people that are able to push all that bullshit to the side and appreciate art on its own and not have the experience tainted by the distractions of what was going on with the artist personally. But like, it's difficult for me to sort of push that out when I hear it and not critique it from that perspective. Like if a song has a chorus that just goes on for too long, where I'm just kind of like, was that a production choice that would have been made there otherwise? But I agree with you. I mean, we can talk about that, you know, more as we listen to it. But I did want to throw that in there, that like a lot of the feelings that I have on it are, in fact, I would guess, guided by the backstory of this album that I would say I've known about from the start of listening to it. You know, I'm somebody that's always, even pre-pod, likes to know the story of kind of production and release of an album. So I think that's impacted a little bit and shaped the way I hear it a little bit.
Absolutely. Dude, we've already gone like pretty far just talking about the background information of Extraordinary Machine. I think we should break this into a two-parter and just start a new episode where we're listening to the music. What do you think?
I think so. I think that the background in this one is so rich and interesting. And I really think that I try to put myself into the shoes as much as I can of, you know, the listeners of this podcast being Fiona Apple fans. And yeah, it's just a really dense period. And I know that I would want the coverage in terms of the background and the lore around this album. So I was kind of expecting that, but I think it's the right choice. And really excited to dive into the tracks next week.
Okay, let's do it. We're going to close it out for this week. We will be back next week with all the tracks from Extraordinary Machine, a listen through and a discussion in depth of each song. We will talk to you then. I have been Walker Glenn.
I'm Zach Glenn.
And we'll see you next week. Bye. Idiotalk is a Glenn Brothers production. Get in touch with us at idiotalk.podcast@gmail.com or follow us on Instagram at idiotalk.podcast. Thanks for listening to